Hello, my name is Kristina Maldonado Bad Hand. I am a animator and illustrator, graphic designer, all that fun stuff, but working with Jeffco as a substance abuse prevention liaison. And today we are going to be talking about environmental justice and Indigenous perspective in Avatar: Last Airbender. And I've got a very special guest panelist. So I will let my guest panelist introduce herself.
Hi, my name's Leala Pourier. I'm a Leala Lakota in Cheyenne River. I am currently in college. I am on the board of a nonprofit called Earth Guardians. I'm on their youth council, and I'm also the director of programming for the nonprofit Stronghold Society, and a huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
This is a pretty amazing series, which I'm excited to talk about and tackle here. So first things first, let's kind of talk about what got you into Avatar: Last Airbender.
Yeah, I remember it would always just come on like at Nickelodeon in the middle of the day, and when I was super young, and it was just a show, and my dad and I could watch together, and it just had all these important lessons, and my dad loved it so much, and he, kept watching it with us, so that kind of kept us like to continue watching it in our life. And I think my most recent watch through was like last month. So it has all these important lessons, and it's very deep, and it has all this representation.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that you could unpack within this series, more so than just environmental justice. It's got themes of like everything, really.
Yeah, exactly.
We could probably do a whole series on just particularly this Avatar: Last Airbender and Korra as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about Avatar: Last Airbender, what's the first episode that you think of for environmental justice?
I would say either the Painted Lady episode or the episode, I don't know the title, where Aang comes across a burned down forest, and then a nearby village every night is being attacked by like an angry spirit. So I think those are kind of the two main ones I think of.
And heads up for everybody, which I probably should have stated earlier, but spoilers if you have not watched this show. We're going to be showing some major spoilers. So for those of you that are kind of entering the gateway of getting involved in this show and getting addicted, these are just some of the images of how cool the show is. This image on the left, I think was official, but if it's not, if that's actually by an artist and you happen to see this video, please let me know your name and I will put that in there. So this is actually the episode that I think you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're gonna watch this clip real quick because there's more in that episode about the burned forest and everything. But yeah, there's that image of the bear spirit and the burned down forest that I think the memory comes from. That episode actually really creeped me out when I first saw it.
Yeah, I remember being a little scared of it as a little kid, but
Yeah, when I watched this series, it was actually while I was in high school, and just the spirit was so creepy. I actually, again, spoilers, was not expecting it to be an adorable little panda bear at the end of the
yeah.
episode. It actually looked a little more like orca or something to me.
Yeah.
But I think that's actually part of what makes this series so relatable, particularly for Indigenous people, is there's a lot of themes of spirituality, and a lot of the spirits have a very Asian influence, but they also have a very like Native influence. The way they look like a lot of our stories and our spirits and everything.
Especially from the Water Tribe and
Yeah, no, definitely the Water Tribe had a lot of influence there. So kind of moving on to that burned village episode, basically the spirit was angry because the Fire Nation was burning down his home and everything and kind of desecrating that, so he took it out on the village. The other one mentioned was the Painted Lady episode, which is the other really standout environmental activism one, and these are a couple images from it. I remember that actually that episode grossed me out because of the way the fish looked.
yeah. Yeah, it was probably my favorite episode though, just because I love Katara and it was a very Katara-centric episode. So
yeah, it was definitely. So I'm going to show another clip from what the Painted Lady was, but these are a couple screenshots. This is actually the clip I'm showing is not going into detail about the fish, but this picture right here pretty much sums it up, that this fisher village, all their clams and everything was like three-headed and like oozing things and pretty nasty. But this is the clips of that episode. So epic breakdown of the Painted Lady episode.
yeah.
But within this episode, basically it's in the third arc of Avatar. It's in the Fire Nation book, and they go to this village, and then Katara ends up joining in and trying to protect the village and take care of it by assuming the identity of kind of their patron spirit, which is the Painted Lady. But when it's revealed that she's actually Katara and she's not the Painted Lady, the villagers get pretty upset with her. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that? Why do you think they got upset with her?
I think they were to some extent, they were pretty right to be upset with her, because in their eyes, it is their like patron spirit. It is the spirit that they pray to. So I guess it's okay for them to feel a little betrayed, especially because an outsider came in and pretended to be that spirit to help. But her friends have her back, and they're like, hey, like I get that you're upset, but she helped all of you, and she only had the purest of intentions. And I think, the Painted Lady coming to visit her at the very end just kind of shows like, okay, this is okay. The spirit world is very broken, and it's still healing in Avatar The Last Airbender. And we don't really see it at its like purest form until Legend of Korra. So it kind of makes sense that the Painted Lady couldn't do all that she wanted to do, but she respected Katara for doing it for her.
Yeah, and that's, with my dad being a spiritual leader, one of the things that he always says is that we don't own these things. And, like as far as our spirituality and our culture goes, it's not something we own, it's something that's a part of us. And so that's in that episode, I can definitely, it resonates with me because of that. Because even though Katara is an outsider, she's a waterbender, so she could do things to help their water that they couldn't, because they're all Fire Nation and none of them could remove the pollution. And like you said, the Painted Lady, her hands were kind of tied because she wasn't able to really interact in its full form of the spirit world and our world being merged together. And that doesn't happen until, again, spoilers, Korra. But yeah, so this episode, I think, resonates a lot with even multiple themes. The same with that last one. I think one of the key themes in Avatar Last Airbender that I really love is that Aang continuously fails.
Yeah, exactly. He it's a very complex, not like one-dimensional series. And I think book 3 is probably my favorite, because we're seeing this Fire Nation as the perpetrators of this like awful war. And in book 3 we get to see that it's not as simple as that, and because war is not as simple as bad guys versus the good guys. And we meet the citizens of the Fire Nation who are living under an oppressive rule, and they don't even really know what's going on. And we're meeting the actual guards, like laughing and talking with each other and joking around, like, because war is very hard and it is very tricky and it affects everybody. And I really like that it's a kid's show and it doesn't stray away from that and doesn't stray away from the complexity of it, and doesn't make it just simple black and white. Aang is the good guy and Fire Nations are the bad guys.
Yeah, and especially when they visit the Fire Nation, because they meet other kids and they meet citizens who are good people, even though they're Fire Nation. And like you said, with the guards laughing and everything, it's the Fire Nation is human. It's not this big bad like evil force that the good guy has to defeat. And I think even more so, which we'll tackle in a little bit, is like Aang's friendship with Zuko. Originally, it starts out with Zuko fighting after him, and basically them constantly fighting, to them actually being friends and Zuko being Aang's teacher.
And the best character arc I've ever seen. Redemption arc.
Yeah, definitely. So here I've basically got the 4 air temples, because again, this is something that resonates, I think, as an Indigenous person, because within Avatar The Last Airbender, when the Fire Nation takes over, they actually cause mass genocide and take out all of the airbenders.
Mm-hmm.
And
The title is
something
very literal.
yeah, totally. Something I found really interesting is each of these air temples is a different direction. And, you know, both you and I are Lakota, and the four directions are
Yeah.
totally woven into our culture in every aspect. So with each of these air temples, all of them are basically southern, western, eastern, and then north. And actually, there's that episode where Aang visits the air temple that's in the Earth Kingdom, which I think is actually the western one,
Yeah.
where he goes in and the air temple is actually occupied by a mechanist, and all of the other there's more
Yeah.
Earth Nation people there, but they've kind of figured out how to fly through mechanics and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can remind me if I'm remembering this wrong, because it actually has been a bit since I've seen that episode. But I remember Aang being kind of a little bit weirded out about the fact that
Yeah.
they're like Earth Nation people flying instead of airbenders, which he got really excited about because he thought that he was no longer the last airbender.
Yeah. Yeah. He was very weirded out, and then he kind of exploded out of anger and was he refused to let them into one of their sacred temples, and he was like, this is the last thing of my people, like, I'm sorry, I don't want like outsiders to see it. But then he comes around and he notices that they're not airbenders, but they have, you know, the spirit of an airbender. They have the same, and they're just good people. They're refugees who found a home in the air temple, which he knew that's what the nomads would have wanted. The nomads probably would have taken them in. And I think, yeah, I think it's a really good episode, and it just further shows like how pure Aang is as a human being. Like he's literally the last survivor of his people, and he still manages to forgive, and he's just awesome.
Yeah, and I mean that lesson I think is really important because so often for a lot of tribes, you know, we've had so much taken away from us that it's very easy to again have that feeling of ownership where you feel like our
Mm-hmm.
lands and our culture is ours, and anybody who comes in, if they like take over it, it feels like you have something taken from you. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's very easy to kind of get that possessive feeling. So I love that episode personally because I feel like it teaches a lot. But as far as the struggles that you see the characters go through for fighting for their environments, because this entire series is, you know, very interconnected to their world and connected to their elements and everything.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who does work trying to protect our environment now, what can you kind of resonate with as far as the struggles go from this series?
um that it's again like it's not as black and white as we'd like it to be. And like, for example, you know, we see when we think of environmental like racism or environmental justice, it's usually the people with power degrading the oppressed people in their land. But we, in the Pain and Lady, it's happening, you know, the Fire Nation is doing it to their own people. And um and in the temple that they took over, and they like made it all like mechanical and engineering, and you know, took away this so-called like, or this once like serene picture that Aang had. um you know, pure, it didn't have like any of that mechanics or anything. But you also have to know like that's how they survive too. So it's a very very tricky subject, and I think Aang and his gang is a good example of how to handle it and how to recognize when it is truly wrong, and like that's the source of the problem, or that what's happening is just, you know, symptoms of it. Like you can't, you know, like I always use the example of you can't, like people who are vegan, you can't get necessarily upset with people in low income communities for not being vegan, and they're like, oh, you're contributing to climate change, da 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 da. But they can't afford to go vegan because going vegan is really expensive and it's very hard. And they're also, you know, not the people causing climate change. That's the big oil companies. So I think Avatar shows a very good example of the symptoms of the root problem, and like how you can't get mad with the symptoms that's happening. You have to address the root cause.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely see that in some of the episodes, like when they first meet Jet.
Exactly.
How he just hates everything Fire Nation, and even going so far as to mug and attack a old man who was just kind of traveling through.
Exactly. And it shows, like, and again, that's another reason why I love Avatar, is like, because traditionally in any show, he would have been like the bad guy. But, we're able to see he lost everything to the Fire Nation. So his anger, it's not necessarily justified, but it's explained. And you have to understand, okay, like, he's not the villain. The Fire Nation, the Fire Lord. The Fire Lord is the villain. He's the main one causing all this pain around the world.
I think actually one of the things I love so much about this series too, as far as all of these themes we're talking about, is we don't actually see Fire Lord Ozai until like the last few episodes. So
exactly.
It's very
silhouette.
Yeah, you relate to it as far as like dealing with environmental justice and dealing with being an Indigenous person fighting against corporations, because so many times you don't actually see the big bad guy.
Exactly.
And the person pulling the strings behind everything. And that's how Avatar is with Ozai. You don't see him until like that big final battle. You just see little glimpses here and there, and then a silhouette, and everything you're fighting is all of these like strings that are going down and little things that you find out about, and like his henchmen and stuff like that. And then sometimes those henchmen turn out not to be that bad.
Yeah, especially like for a while, Azula was the big bad villain, but we see just like everything in the series, it's not as black and white as that. She's traumatized basically. She grew up with a rather abusive father, and her mother left, and it was just a whole she's very broken. So, and you very much see that, and that's why I love that final battle between her and Zuko in the very end. I love that they do sad music in the battle. They don't do giant like extravagant,
like victorious music. It's just kind of heart-rendering.
Yeah, because it's sad. It's two siblings fighting each other, and one of them just had like a mental breakdown, and that's what war is. It's not, victory isn't always as sweet, and I think that scene really encompassed that.
And we see that with Zuko too. I think that's the thing with Fire Lord Ozai, and like the impact on his kids. Again, that's kind of something that we see in our culture and in reality now, is it impacts in different ways. So for so long you see Zuko just like so angry and pursuing Aang at every chance he gets. It's his only hope to basically regain his honor and regain his dad's respect, which he never actually had in the first place, but he thinks that's his only option. And then eventually he realizes that with Aang, there's actually friendship there. It's not, he's not nothing he does is basically going to make his dad feel the way he wants him to feel.
Yeah.
So basically what we also see in Avatar Last Airbender is a lot of oppression, and a lot of
very good episodes,
things that we can relate to as far as things that happen in our modern world. So here, these two images, the one on the left is from an episode in book 1 where Katara and Aang and Sokka go to an Earth Kingdom camp where a lot of earthbenders are being held and kind of forced to work as like miners essentially, and then Katara makes them all rise up and like attack. Which they did tackle in the horrible live action movie, but
we don't talk about that.
Yeah,
that movie doesn't exist.
Exactly. Most people try not to think of that, any true fans anyways, because that was just a whole, And then the episode on the right is actually from a really creepy episode. Like, I love how creepy that episode was.
I was terrified of that episode as a kid.
Yeah. So that episode is again from book 3, going into the Fire Nation, and Katara meets a waterbender who can actually bloodbend, and we get to kind of see how she got that ability, and that ability coming from her being locked in a cage. And this image on the right is actually a image of all these waterbenders that are stuck in this steel cage with no water, and because water is a weapon to them, so they're basically locked in those cages to die.
Yeah, and their hands and every part of them's bound when they get water, and it's yeah.
Yeah, it's an intense episode. And I think there's a lot that we can resonate with right now with the situation going on with the immigrants, and just as Indigenous history, when we look at a lot of tribes and situations that they've been in, that's this like totally they took a page out of history and put it in a cartoon.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with like I guess just Indigenous rights to their own like resources, but in this case it's their bending. The earthbenders, they're put on a steel ship in the middle of the ocean to work as slaves, and there's no earth around, so they can't use anything to defend themselves. And then in this episode with the waterbenders, like I said earlier, their hands and feet, and they're just completely bound when water is given to them, and just kind of this oppressor holding back the Indigenous, like taking away the Indigenous, their resource, what makes them, their land, what makes them them, which I think is like really powerful symbolism.
Yeah, and you can understand like with Hama, which is the waterbender who created the bloodbending, kind of like with Jet and with other characters that we see throughout the series, you can see how she got to be as crazy as she is. She's a really scary character because she's this little sweet lady, but then she has this terrifying ability to be able to control people and to to bend the blood within them and make them do what she wants them to do. And pretty much she's just preying on the Fire Nation in the same way that Jet was. But when you look at what she went through and you look at what was taken from her, you can kind of relate, and you can understand where that anger comes from and how she ended up being the character that she would be. And like you said, in any other cartoon or any other series, they would be the bad guys. They would they wouldn't be a sympathetic character that you meet and learn a lesson from. It would be like, these are the guys you have to beat.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, I was thinking about it, I'm pretty sure the only like pure evil character is the Fire Lord. And again, we don't see him until the last few episodes. So the villain is this faceless, corporation, if we're putting it in modern days, like you were saying. And I think that's just so powerful, because a lot of the times a villain isn't just one specific person distilled with all this evil.
Yeah, and I mean, even with Ozai, we don't really get to see much of his story, but
exactly,
he also is very much kind of a victim of his privilege and of growing up basically being promised being the lord of the entire land. So when he becomes Fire Lord, that's exactly what he does. He goes and conquers everything and wipes out whole civilizations in order to secure his position as being a Fire Lord. And you kind of see that was drilled into him from youth, because he does the same thing to Azula.
Yeah, and we kind of see the backstory of his father when we learn Avatar Roku's backstory. And so you can kind of, we see his father growing into that more hardened, bad guy. So you can kind of see how that would have been passed on to Ozai, and again, or not. Yeah, Ozai. Sozin is his grandfather. And then again onto Azula. So it's like,
yeah, it's a cycle of trauma.
Exactly. Trauma of your own privilege.
So part of this discussion, we've talked about environmental justice, but we're also talking about Indigenous perspectives. So what comes to mind when you hear the word Indigenous?
Oh wow, so many things. I guess just I would say like a part of the land and honor. Um, so just this deep connection to the land and um, between the land and the people, and the honor and gratefulness that people feel to have that connection. And yeah, I guess that's kind of a very narrowed down summary. There's a lot of words.
No, that's a really good summary, because that's what, I mean, Indigenous means of or from the land. And I think so many times people think of the word Indigenous and they think that it just means you're a Native person. And they think that it just means Native American or Native Hawaiian or anything like that. And they're actually missing that key element, that it's of or from the land. So all of us are Indigenous. It's just that the people who are Indigenous to this land, this is our land. So like, we identify by our tribes and we're Native Americans. So when we use the term Indigenous to America, that's what we're mean. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're claiming that word as not everybody. But that's that definition. I think if people actually resonated with that more, thought about it more, then maybe we wouldn't see so much environmental like destruction as we see. Because that's with the idea of everybody being Indigenous and us being connected to the land because that's where we come from, you're killing your mom.
I think the episode that comes to mind for that is this. I think it's the siege of the Northern Water Tribe, when spoiler, what's his name? Zhao. He takes the moon spirit, and Iroh's like, this isn't about the war anymore. Like, you burn that moon spirit, you are hurting all of us. Like, this is you're not just gonna hurt the waterbenders. Like, you're setting it all off of balance. And I think that's a really good example of the interconnectedness, because he did end up burning the fish, and then it all kind of went really bad, and you could kind of see it in his eyes before like right after he did it, he was like, oh, what did I just do? Like, but then he's like, whoops. And then we see Princess Yue, who, the water tribe is arguably the most connected and mirrored from Indigenous cultures. You see her give her spirit to the moon spirit because they were tied together. So I think that's just kind of a really good example of Indigenous connected, or not just Indigenous people, but like human beings' connectivity to the land. Like, burning that moon spirit hurt everybody, including the Fire Nation.
And Yue's sacrifice saved everybody. If she didn't do that, basically none of the characters would have survived past that episode. And like, I love Princess Yue for that reason, because she's very like dutiful to her culture, but she's also like just a really great and genuine character. I love that character so much. And I love Iroh. I'm glad you brought up Iroh.
He's like the
Mr. Miyagi of the
exactly.
He reminds me of my dad.
I love how he takes from every bending. And he started off as like the dragon of the West, or is that what it was? Yeah, he was the one person who was able to like penetrate into Ba Sing Se, the wall of Ba Sing Se, and then he turns into this sweet old man who has all this respect for everyone and thinks this war is dumb, but he's also waging his time to make that stand.
And he just loves his tea. And like, the thing I love the most about him is actually his dedication to his nephew is the only reason why he just put up with any nonsense. So going on to Zuko, since I brought up the crazy nephew. That's another struggle that we see within Avatar The Last Airbender that's really cool, is our original bad guy, when we first start watching it, Zuko is the bad guy, and he's constantly going after Aang, and you think it's going to be basically one of those cartoons where you've got this big fiery bad guy, and then as you learn more about him, you realize that Zuko's not as bad in the episode with the Blue Spirit when he saves Aang. And then as the series goes on, like you said, one of the best character arcs, because you really get to know Zuko and you get to see how he became the way he was, starting from the image on the left with him fighting Aang, and that haircut, like, that made him look so much more like a villain. So I liked when they let him have normal hair after as it went on, because I know that haircut is very cultural, but it also was pretty funny looking on him. But he starts out as the enemy, and then the only way that Aang learns firebending is actually through Zuko, because he has such a mental block against the Fire Nation and against firebending, which you can't blame him. His entire culture and family and basically everything he ever knew was wiped out by the Fire Nation. And so that's one of the episodes that I actually love, is when they tackle the fact that he doesn't want to learn firebending, and he has to, because he's the Avatar.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, I always say this, Zuko is honestly one of the best, like, well-written characters I've ever seen. He has such a good redemption arc, and the best thing about it is his goodness doesn't just come out of nowhere. You see it, like you said, and very early on in the Blue Spirit episode, where he had all these opportunities. Like, he brushed it off as like, well, I didn't want Zhao to get the credit for taking the Avatar. But you see all these moments where he could have easily, gotten rid of Aang, and he didn't. And you can see, like, he was truly good, and that it was the circumstances that he was raised in that made him, the villain for the first bit of episodes.
And like one of the episodes that always comes to mind when I think about Zuko's character arc and how he ends up getting welcomed into the group is like that episode where Toph is like trying so desperately to have a connection to Zuko, because everybody has like their Zuko talk, as she calls it, where like Sokka has a moment alone with Zuko, and Katara has many moments alone with Zuko. Like, on the side note, I was totally rooting for the Zuko Katara pairing, not so much the Katara Aang.
I feel that.
And then Aang has this big relationship with him, and so like the episode where Toph is like really just trying to have a moment with him, and he ends up burning her feet, like that episode.
And she still like forgave him and was like defending him, like he didn't know, like I scared him.
Yeah, I love that episode, because it just makes me kind of laugh, because he's, again, him and Aang are such good characters because they fail so much. Like, Aang being the good guy, you expect him to always be triumphant, but in that first clip that we showed, he constantly messes up, and he was only gone for 100 years because he ran away. And he ended up meeting all of these characters, and basically the Fire Nation was able to take over because the Avatar was gone, and it was because he did a total kid thing where he got overwhelmed and he ran away and then ended up in a sphere.
Not his
fault.
But
I think with like him and Zuko, their character arcs are very similar in the sense that their constant failures, actually they learn from them. And that's very rare to see in a lot of cartoons, and kind of even in reality, is every time they fall down or every time they make a mistake, they get right back up and try again. And that ends up creating their lifelong friendship, and it actually like helps them it helps Aang learn all four elements in probably a way he wouldn't have been able to if he hadn't disappeared.
Yeah, especially that episode with where they go to the Sun Warriors to meet, the original firebenders. That was such a powerful episode, and I think it was very important on also showing, you know, the complexities of war and showing that fire isn't, you know, only destructive and isn't only bad. And it shows like the beauty of this. And I think it's so important that it was Zuko and Aang that learned that too, you know. And like you're saying, two people that had failed, you know, one person, you know, like was young, was burned by his own father, and you know, never got to live up to the full potential like his sister was, you know, because she had like the blue firebending, and Aang, who was terrified of firebending, and he accidentally burned Katara and all this other things. And I think it was so important for those two to see the true beauty of what firebending was.
Yeah, and just that connecting to the roots of that too is like really connecting to, like you said, that connection to the land and to their cultural roots too. It's like the four elements come together within the Avatar because it was a gift from the spirit. Like the spirit world was basically, they created the Avatar to essentially be their advocate and to bring balance. And with him being gone, that's how the Fire Nation ended up taking over and everything. But what we see, and again, a little bit of spoilers, but what we see as Avatar Last Airbender evolves into Korra is we get to see it even farther as far as the imbalance and how people kind of misinterpreted what the Avatar was really supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I don't know, when I first watched Korra, I was a little weirded out by the spirit world. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. Weirded out by the spirit world, because it was like so bright and so like I don't know. It was not what I was used to from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then my friend brought up the point, well, that was the spirit world when it was going through 100-year war, and this is the spirit world after it's been healed and mended. And I just think, you know, Legend of Korra did such a good job of exploring the spirit world and how it connects with our world. And, you know, my dad always says, you know, that's not the other side, we're the other side. Like, we're, you know, you know this, he says this all the time. Spirits on a human journey, not humans on a spirit journey. And I think Korra does a really good job of showing that. And obviously Avatar touched on it because it's, you know, it's the parent of Korra. But I really like how it delved in deep in Korra for that.
Yeah, and I like how both series are kind of connected, but you really see kind of the beginnings of those lessons within Last Airbender. So one of the things within this series is kind of like there's a lot of echoes of Asian culture, but then also kind of the indigenous culture, like the water tribe, like you said, you can kind of relate to as far as being native. And like the episode where Aang meets the lion turtle, I love so much because it's this giant island on the back of a turtle, which you know,
Turtle Island.
North America is basically, we call it Turtle Island because it's supposed to be on the back of a turtle is what it looks like. And that's a North American indigenous legend around most of the tribes. So
And
I also think, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's also super powerful that Aang learns his most like powerful skill from the lion turtle. The giant spoiler ahead, the ability to take another person's bending. And I think I like it because the spirits kind of like gifted that to him. They're like, okay, like we've seen that all these years, like you've been fighting for so long because you didn't want to kill the Fire Lord, and like, you know, like everyone's always saying like that's your last option, like you have to do it. And he's like, no, I don't want to. And because of that like constant respect for human life and that constant just goodness, the spirit world kind of like gifted him like, okay, we're gonna send you the lion turtle, like, and lion turtle is gonna teach you what you need to know to do that. And I think that's just so powerful.
Yeah, and that's like, I think with Aang's respect for it. Like everybody was saying that was the only option. Sokka was very like, no, you just have to kill him, and if you can't kill him, I'll kill him.
Yeah,
And it was
the watermelon firelord.
yeah, and it was just kind of black and white as far as Sokka was concerned. But again, it's because he was seeing all of the destruction that was coming from the Fire Lord, whereas like Aang was looking at it as a human life, and as Zuko's dad, and as this like as somebody who he didn't want to take that life away because he didn't feel like he had the right to take away a life. And he's a monk, so it's like it goes against everything for him to do that. So when he got that ability of taking away bending, like, and I love how that actually ends up being echoed later in Korra, because that to me was a prime example of how you can take a gift and actually turn it and abuse it, and exactly like how we got this entire story of The Last Airbender is like all of these groups and all of these societies within their world have this amazing gift of bending the elements, and this amazing gift of being able to build their civilizations by their connection with that element and with the land mass that they're on. And then somehow people abuse it, and it ends up in this situation where you've got a war going on with the Fire Nation, but you also see it scattered throughout the whole series within some of the attitudes of the societies that they built up. And, you see the traditional benders who kind of took a step away from society because they started seeing that being abused. So you have the swamp benders who are like, nope, I'm not going to deal with anybody, and they kind of just do their own little thing in their swamp. And then you've got like the original firebenders and kind of the people who go off the map because they were avoiding those big cities and kind of that corruption that ended up happening.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too how we still explore that in Korra too, where it's, the world is still like modernized, like it's more like they're in like their steam age, that like, and we see it as they're still honoring their bending, but most of like the main, like the villains are people who are abusing that bending. They're the people who they have these gifts and they are just abusing them. Instead of connecting them further to the land, they're trying to use it to like get ahead. In the last season we have, oh my god, I can't remember her name, but she's trying to metal bending, and she's trying to make like the whole world under the Earth Kingdom, under her reign. And we see the water benders or the blood benders when we in the first season, and it just kind of shows, I think it does a really good job of showing like, okay, the world is at peace now, but there's still problems. Like we saw this 100-year war in Avatar, but it's not always going to be perfect.
Yeah, you see it kind of evolve, and in Korra actually, like you kind of see the evolution where people stop bending. Because they get the modern technologies and everything. So even more so in Korra, you can kind of see them get farther and farther away from that original identity and that original connection to land. And, that's what we end up seeing by the end of Korra, when they finally reopen the spirit world and kind of merge that. They actually
Korra in the sun.
Yeah, you're able to see kind of everybody living in peace with the spirits and stuff, kind of the way Iroh was, which I love that he's the only human allowed in the spirit world. That was pretty hilarious.
Yeah, I love that so much.
Hanging out with all the spirits. But so basically this quote has nothing to do with Avatar Last Airbender, but it totally fit our discussion. And progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. I don't personally know anything about George Bernard Shaw, but I love that quote because I feel like it is very hitting the nail on the head. And kind of moving forward, what would you say are some solutions that we could do to kind of remedying our environmental relationship?
I think it has, of course, I say, my big thing I say it all the time is the key to fixing the environment is returning back to Indigenous knowledge and recognizing this, we have this deep connection to the land, and like we can't exist without her. And, she can exist without us, but we need her to survive. And I also think it has a lot to do with being, connected to ourselves. We're seeing it in the middle of this quarantine. We're seeing in some areas the land is like really healing, like the water is clearing up, the smog is clearing. And while while some people are in not the best situations right now during quarantine, there's a lot of people who are home and they're reconnecting to their family, and they're re-recognizing what's really important, and that's just connections to the land and connections with one another. And I think, until we start to realize like it's not all about money or about, material objects, it's about our deep personal connections, then I think until we recognize that, then the earth is going to keep hurting.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. So now I got my last two questions that I like to ask when doing panels. Anything that you are reading or watching right now?
Ooh, I'm rewatching The Magicians on Sci-Fi. It's very good. It's very funny. I don't know why. I just really love it. It like is serious, but at the same time doesn't take itself seriously. It is very complex. I very much recommend it. They just had their final season. In reading, I did just get a new book that I haven't started yet because I'm rereading the Percy Jackson series again. Starting, in the very original series I read when I was like 12. And then, because I love the Heroes of Olympus series, but I can't start reading that. I have to read from the beginning. Which sucks because I love Piper, so I got to get through like 5 books before I can get to Piper. But
nice. And then are there any projects that you are working on right now?
A lot. With Earth Guardians, we are doing a civic engagement project right now. So we actually are going to be releasing shirts soon. And our whole campaign is Vote for the Earth. So in this upcoming election, we're just encouraging everybody for across the board, whether it's local all the way up to like the presidential, to make Earth conscious decisions and, just get to know and understand also our our electoral system and everything, and how to reach out to your senators and how to read the confusing wording of bills and things like that. Additionally, we're starting, it's still early in the works, but we're doing 1 million tree projects, and we're going to try and once this whole quarantine and COVID thing kind of hopefully blows over soon, we're going to start planting trees around Colorado and hopefully expand from there.
Nice. Awesome. So thanks everybody for tuning in to our panel and our discussion on Avatar. If you haven't seen it and we just spoiled a lot for you, watch it. Trust me, anything we spoiled is still way better to watch than to hear us talk. Yeah. But check out those series, and then definitely support any of the projects that Earth Guardians got going on in Leala. And yeah, so thank you guys. And
thank you.
Tune off.